Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to be looking at a concept that I think is going to resonate with a lot of you. It's about how culture shapes us, specifically the kind of tug of war between individualism and collectivism. And we're going to be using this really cool study from 1988 by Harry Triandis. It's going to help us unlock some serious aha moments, I think, about how these forces influence everything from how we behave in social situations to even our health.
It really is like this sort of invisible code embedded in our societies. We're swimming in it, but we rarely stop to ask ourselves, why do I think or act this way?
Exactly. So let's decode it. I mean, you're probably familiar with the basic idea, right? Like individualistic cultures like the US, we value the self-made person, right?
Yeah.
The independent speaking your mind. But then you've got collectivist cultures like Japan, for example. It's more about the group's needs, harmony, fitting in. But Triandis really goes deeper than that. He found that these aren't just abstract ideas. They actually have like a real impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you look at something like heart disease, for instance, collectivist cultures tend to have lower rates of heart disease. And why is that? It's not just genetics. It's the support systems that are built into those societies. So you can imagine being surrounded by this really tight-knit community your whole life, knowing that you're not facing any challenge alone. And that does wonders for reducing your stress, right? Which has a huge impact on heart health.
Okay, now you're making me think. Like, if I was raised in a more individualistic setting, does that mean I'm just, like, doomed to heart problems or something?
Not at all. Not at all. But it does highlight the power of awareness, I think. So if you know that your cultural background leans towards valuing that independence, then you can kind of be more intentional about building your own support network. So it's like individualism might tell you go it alone. But if you understand that there might be this link to your health, you can make a different choice.
That's a really good point. And Trandis' research also goes into like how these values get ingrained in us from childhood.
Well, absolutely. I mean, think about it in collectivist cultures. Kids are often raised with this strong emphasis on respecting their elders, following traditions, not rocking the boat too much. It's not about crushing individuality. It's about putting the good of the family unit first, the community as a whole.
Right. It makes sense. And then on the other hand, you've got individualistic cultures where kids are often encouraged to be unique, stand out, pursue their own goals, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about self-expression, taking initiative, even questioning authority at times.
Wow.
And both approaches have their ups and downs. Like in the U.S., we celebrate that go-getter spirit. But it can also lead to this intense pressure to achieve, sometimes at the cost of close relationships.
Yeah, that's true. So it's not really black and white then, right? It's more like a spectrum. You can totally find individualistic folks within a collectivist society and vice versa, right?
Wisely. Triandis actually mapped out cultures on this continuum, showing how even within, say, Japan, there's variation. And get this, even within the U.S., you've got regions leaning more one way or the other.
Wait, really? I was like, here in the U.S., it's all about that rugged individualism. Are you telling me there are pockets of the U.S. that are more collectivist?
You bet. It might surprise you, but the Deep South actually, with its emphasis on community ties and traditional values, it leans more collectivist. Now contrast that with the Plain States or the Rocky Mountain regions, where that self-reliance and that independence are really prized.
Okay, that's blowing my mind a little bit. So even within a country, we know there's this like hidden cultural map that's influencing how people interact.
It is. And that's why I think understanding these concepts really matters. So if you're moving to a new city, or starting a new job where you're working with colleagues from different backgrounds, or even just trying to connect better with your neighbors, knowing these tendencies can really help you avoid a lot of misunderstandings.
Okay, I'm officially hooked. Let's dive deeper into how these cultural differences show up in our daily lives.
Let's do it. It's kind of like having X-ray vision for all these different social situations. You start to see these invisible forces shaping people's reactions.
Totally. And Triandis' research also gives us this lens for understanding not just differences between cultures, but variations within them as well. It's not as simple as like slapping a label on a whole country.
Exactly. Remember that hypothetical representation he created? It showed how individuals and groups, even in the same society, can fall at different points on that individualism collectivism spectrum. It's a great reminder that culture is complex and dynamic.
Yeah, it's like those choose your own adventure books we read as kids. You might start in the same place, but your choices lead you down different paths.
Exactly. And this awareness is key to developing cultural sensitivity, I think. We can't just assume that everyone shares the same values and beliefs, even if we live in the same country or region. understanding these subtle variations can really help us approach our interactions with more empathy and understanding.
Okay, so let's get practical. How does this actually play out in real-life situations?
Okay, let's imagine you're working on a team project, and one of your colleagues who comes from a more collectivist background seems hesitant to speak up in meetings.
Oh, that's interesting. Why might that be?
Well, in collectivist cultures, group harmony is often prioritized. So individuals might be less inclined to assert themselves or express dissenting opinions. Especially if you could disrupt those team dynamics. They might prioritize the group's success over individual recognition.
So instead of assuming that they're just disengaged, I should maybe create a space where they feel more comfortable sharing their thoughts.
Exactly. You could maybe try asking them directly for their input, emphasize that their perspective is really valuable to the team's success, or consider using some collaborative brainstorming techniques where everyone's ideas are encouraged and respected.
Those are great tips. What about in personal relationships? How might cultural differences impact how we interact with people there?
Oh, absolutely. Let's say you're dating someone from a more collectivist culture. You might notice that they place a really high value on family obligations and really prioritize spending time with their extended family.
That's definitely something that a lot of people from more individualistic cultures might find challenging.
Right. In individualistic cultures, we're often focused on the nuclear family. Personal independence is highly valued, so it's crucial to understand and respect those differences. Recognize that your partner's cultural background might influence their priorities and behaviors.
So it's not about trying to change them, it's about understanding their perspective and appreciating the richness that they bring to the relationship.
Exactly. It's about embracing those differences and finding ways to navigate them together. Sometimes it's about compromise. Other times it's about expanding your own definition of what a healthy relationship looks like.
This is making me rethink so many of my past experiences. Now, remember earlier we were talking about collectivism being linked to lower rates of heart disease. I'd love to unpack that a little bit further.
Yeah, it's a fascinating connection. One of the key mechanisms at play there is social support. Collectivist cultures, with their emphasis on strong social bonds and community ties, they tend to provide more social support to their members. And research has shown time and time again that social support acts as this buffer against stress, which we know has a significant impact on our heart health.
So being surrounded by a supportive network can actually protect your heart.
In a way, yes. Of course, heart disease is complex. There are many contributing factors. But social support has really emerged as a significant protective factor.
That makes me wonder then, are people from individualistic cultures kind of at a disadvantage then?
I wouldn't say it's about disadvantages. It's more about recognizing the different cultural strengths and potential vulnerabilities. So while individualism promotes that independence and self-reliance, which are valuable traits, it can also lead to increased stress and social isolation, especially if those individual pursuits come at the expense of those meaningful relationships.
It's like that saying, no man is an island. We thrive on that connection.
Exactly. So while individualistic cultures value that personal achievement and autonomy, I think it's important to find a balance between those aspirations and nurturing those vital social connections that really contribute to our overall well-being.
So it's not about abandoning individual goals or conforming to a collectivist mindset. It's about finding ways to kind of integrate both individual and collective values into our lives.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot where we can pursue our own passions while also cultivating meaningful relationships and contributing to our communities. And that balance might look different for each person, depending on their background and values.
That's fascinating. But does this dynamic affect other areas of health beyond just heart disease?
Research suggests that it might also play a role in mental well-being. Collectivist cultures, with their emphasis on interdependence and social harmony, often create environments where individuals feel this strong sense of belonging and support, which can be a protective factor against mental health issues like depression and anxiety.
It makes sense. If you feel connected and know you have people to rely on, you're less likely to feel isolated and overwhelmed by challenges.
Right. And conversely, while individualistic cultures encourage independence, they can sometimes foster a sense of competition and social comparison, which can contribute to feelings of inadequacy and loneliness, potentially increasing the risk of mental health issues. Again, it's all about balance.
It's almost as if these cultural values create different social ecosystems. which can either nourish or deplete our emotional well-being.
That's a really powerful way to think about it.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of being mindful of these cultural influences. We can create environments that support both individual growth and collective well-being.
So it's about finding that delicate balance between nurturing our individual needs and fostering a sense of community and connection. But how does this play out in real-world scenarios? How do we even begin to navigate these complexities?
It really is a balancing act, finding that sweet spot. But having this awareness is huge. Like once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them.
It's like you suddenly understand this hidden language. And all those like confusing interactions from the past start to make sense. But how do we actually use this knowledge? Like in practical ways?
Think of it like a new tool in your communication kit. So let's say you're working with a colleague, and they're from a more collectivist culture. And they're struggling with a project. Instead of jumping in with a solution right away, maybe try asking them, hey, who in your network could offer some support with this? That slight shift acknowledges their cultural framework, and it might just open up a whole new avenue for problem solving.
Oh, that's such a simple but brilliant example, and it really highlights how these differences aren't about right or wrong, it's about perspective.
Exactly. And that's where Trandis' research on those variations within cultures gets really interesting. And remember how we talked about how even within collectivist societies, there are all these nuances in how it's expressed. He specifically looked at Japan and Puerto Rico for this.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. They're both considered collectivist cultures, but how do they differ?
Well, while both cultures really emphasize that group harmony and loyalty, the specific in-groups that hold the most sway can vary. So in Japan, for instance, the workplace or one's really close social circle might be the dominant influence, whereas in Puerto Rico, family, particularly extended family, often takes center stage.
So even when we're talking about these broad cultural dimensions, it's important to remember there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely. Culture is dynamic and multifaceted.
Yeah.
It's shaped by history, geography, social structures. It's constantly evolving.
And learning to appreciate those subtle threads. That's what makes understanding culture so fascinating. This deep dive has given me so much to think about.
Me too. It's a great reminder that we're all products of our cultural backgrounds.
Right.
And that awareness can be incredibly empowering, both in our personal lives and in how we navigate this increasingly interconnected world.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Inspired by Trandis' work. Now that you have a deeper understanding of individualism and collectivism, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Are you more drawn to one end of the spectrum or the other? How might this be influencing your choices, your relationships, your career path? There's no right or wrong answer here. It's about self-awareness and understanding those forces that shape who we are.
And remember, if you're interested in diving deeper into this topic, we've got links to some of the research mentioned today in our show notes. Happy exploring.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into individualism and collectivism. It's been a real eye-opener. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those hearts open.